appreciate your presence here with us tonight. We got some new faces here. I love it. The old faces were kind of getting tiresome.
They're just getting
This is Benchmark Books, and the only bookstore in an office building within 500 miles or more. And I'm happy to announce that we are just signing a new long-term lease, so whether you like us being in this building or not, we're going to be here for a while. I like to ask this at our signings, how many have not been to Benchmark Books before? Oh. Yeah. Half of those that just raised their hands have been here many times. So well, we appreciate you coming. We like to think of ourselves as kind of an oasis in the desert here, and we have books that you can't readily find elsewhere. We have Mormon history and biography and Mormon studies in general, both new, used, out of print, rare, and so we love the fact that some of our customers are just readers and don't really care what kind of binding is on the book, and those who only want a first edition in a dust jacket signed by the author. And so we love bringing everybody together here, and this is a great meeting place. We enjoy having lots of different people come to our store and enjoy what we have here. So welcome. What we'd like to do tonight is, I think our author speaker has got it narrowed down to a couple of hour lecture.
3 hours.
3 hours. I told him he could go 3 times longer than any closing argument he'd ever. I'll introduce him in a second, but what we do is we'll hear from our special guest author, John Dinger, in just a minute or two, and he will tell us about his new book. Funny, a lot of you probably are glad to see the book that he's going to be talking about. What a coincidence. The Nauvoo City and High Council Minutes, never before done in their totality, and we always like to give the publisher a plug. We have several people here tonight from Signature Books. It's not only a fine book as far as content, but it's packaged very well. It's a handsome book, and it's one that we're proud to sell. So we appreciate Signature Books and the quality of the books that they produce. We even have some other Signature Book authors here. So John will talk about that. He will be happy to answer questions after he finishes his presentation. And then after that, we would invite you to come up, and if you haven't had a chance to buy one or more of his books yet, and other books all throughout the store, we'd invite you to do that at that point. And then he'll be here to sign and to talk to you. We'll have some refreshments out in the hallway afterwards, and we'd love for you to just mingle and stay and take a look around. Ask any of us on the staff about any of the books here, or if you have collecting interests, or if you're looking for certain books, we would we'd love to talk to you about that. We have a couple of bathrooms down the hall there. It's only $1 to get the code to get in. What else? What more can I say?
Fiery in the Romans book.
What's that?
Fiery book.
Oh, well, yeah, we have some new titles, just really quickly. That there's a brand new translation of the Joseph Smith Papyri, all the known Joseph Smith papyri, and along with commentary and footnotes and so on. And this one is going to be of great interest to those who are really interested in the Pearl of Great Price, the Book of Abraham, the early church history and Joseph Smith's connection with the papyri. It's a it's a very penetrating book on that subject. And the Mormon people, this is a brand new one that some are saying will possibly even replace the Mormon Experience by Leonard Arrington and Davis Bitton, which was written primarily for a non-Mormon audience. Matt Bowman is an up-and-coming scholar. He's won several awards for some of his essays, and this is published by Random House, a nationally prominent publisher, and so we're looking for good things.
It was reviewed in the New York Times today.
Was it? Okay, that's good to know. We recently had Sam Brown. Some of you were here for the signing we had recently in Heaven as It Is on Earth. Fascinating look at death in Joseph Smith's day, how it was viewed, and its place in Mormon theology. And he's quite a fascinating guy. So we would invite you to take a look at some of the newer books, but particularly John's. And we've known John for, I got to stand over here where the camera actually is. I wanted to mention that this will be broadcast on YouTube. We've been doing our last several author signings that are, is broadcast the right word? It's available for viewing on YouTube. So if you don't want to make your big debut before the world, the camera's right there, so don't put your mug in front of it. This will also be, there'll be other photographs taken, and this is being recorded. But John, I don't know, how far back do we go?
Shopping here for
Well,
10
he's
years.
been a customer for quite a while, and we either like to hire him or make him authors. So we did both with him. We didn't have anything to do with him becoming an author, but John worked for us for a while and is a delightful guy. He's a deputy prosecuting attorney for Ada County in Boise, Idaho, and has written several articles for legal journals and also in the Journal of Mormon History. And this is his first book-length project, and he's working on another one right now. I don't know, are we able to talk about that at this point? Tell him.
I think so.
Why don't you mention it when you're,
Okay.
telling us about the book? But John is a good scholar. He loves books. He loves history, and I think that really comes out in this book. And I know that we'll all enjoy hearing from John Dinger. I'll turn that time over to him.
Now I'm used to only speaking to 12 people and an alternate, so this is going to be a little bit new to me. And when I'm speaking in front of juries, they don't get to ask me questions, so this is going to be new. But before I jump in, I'm just so grateful. In fact, I really am honored to speak here. So many times I sat in the audience looking up at these people who have a book, and I feel like a fraud today. Because of all the wonderful, authors and people they bring in, and that I'm here doing that is really an honor for me. And you don't know how lucky you are. You heard I'm from Boise, and we don't have anything like Benchmark up there. You come down here and you hang out and you run into an author or a publisher or somebody, and it's just wonderful. So I'm very grateful to be here. I'm very glad that I was invited. So today I'm going to speak just for a bit on the High Council and the City Council. And I'm going to assume that everybody here, everybody who would be interested in this book has a basic understanding of Mormon history. So I'll breeze over some things, but and get into the real nitty-gritty and what makes these documents so interesting. We'll start with the High Council. And the High Council was formed in Kirtland on February 17, 1834. And it was a council that was in charge of the finances, the trials, the disfellowships of the church. And as other branches sprung up, they would have their own high councils, but the high council at the center of Zion was the leading high council. The other ones were subject to it. If something happened in one of the other ones, you would appeal to the one in the center of Zion. And so when the Saints left Missouri, the new high council at the center of Zion was the Nauvoo High Council, and so those are the minutes that we have. And that was formed on October 20th, 1839, and that's when the records start in this volume. And they go through October 18th, 1845. So we get that 6 years there of the minutes. And they were very good record keepers, oftentimes every single week. More often than not, they were every week rather than having weeks missed. So you have just a whole lot of history there. Now, one of the things the High Council did when they were in Nauvoo was they gave their blessing to elect a city council, because for a few years they were kind of doing both jobs. And as you'll read in there, you'll kind of see this. One of the big things they're always fighting over in the city council are actually laws dealing with animals. You know, a cow gets loose and eats the corn, or what are we going to do with these dogs? How much should we tax them? And so at the beginning you see the High Council, before there's a city council, passing these laws, except the punishment is disfellowshipment instead of, 6 months in jail or a $500 fine. So once the city council comes, you see a bit of that separation. But the city council starts in February 3rd, 1841. And so I wanted to just share with you sort of a typical entry, or what these men did. And quite honestly, they were building a city from scratch. So I'm going to tell you, here we go. About 9 months on the job, November 13th, 1841, this is what they did. They swore in a new member, the infamous William Law. They passed an ordinance to allot money for the recorder so he could have a desk and get some paper. They talked about what streets needed to be surveyed next and decided to pay the surveyor. They passed an ordinance on appeals. They literally were setting up their court system. You literally see that throughout the records. And they passed an ordinance concerning vagrants and disorderly persons. And I'm going to read this ordinance because Kurt assured me that tonight we were all going to be subject to that. And I'm the one who gets to decide if you're disorderly people and throw you out. So I suggest you keep the questions easy. But this is one of their laws that they passed. Be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Nauvoo that all persons, vagrant, idle, or disorderly persons, persons found drunk in or about the streets, all suspicious persons, persons who have no fixed place of residence or visible means of support, or cannot give a good account of themselves, persons guilty of profane or indecent language or behavior, persons guilty of using indecent, impertinent, or unbecoming language toward any city officer when in the discharge of his duty, or of menacing, threatening, or otherwise obstructing said office, shall on conviction thereof before the mayor or municipal court be required to enter into security for good behavior. So, like Kurt said, I can throw you out tonight if I want. Now, they also talked about assessing the city, and then the mayor, and at this time that was John C. Bennett, then gave a talk about, or spoke about the rights that they had and the rights to tax the individuals in the city under the Nauvoo Charter. And then, as always, it seems like just about in every single meeting, they talk about what tax to assess per dog. And so that was a typical meeting, but there were also very exciting and important things that go on in there. One of which that led to a lot of trouble outside of Nauvoo and with people, opponents of Joseph Smith, were the Habeas Corpus Acts. And that alone I could talk for a couple hours on, so I'll try and keep that very basic. But the habeas corpus, what that was is when somebody was arrested, you could make an application to a court, what was called a writ of habeas corpus, which requires you to be brought in front of a judge, and then he gets to look behind the legality of your arrest. And the Nauvoo Charter contained the right for habeas corpus, whereas all the other charters in Nauvoo did not. That's something that the Mormons got in there. And so this became pretty serious contention amongst other people, because as the Missourians would come in to arrest Joseph Smith, they would arrest him. He would apply for a writ of habeas corpus. They'd take him in front of the municipal court, who was run by the city council. They would look at it and say, nope, too bad, you got to let him go. And he would get out. And so there was the perception that nobody could touch Joseph Smith, that they couldn't do anything. And this really came to a head in 1842 when John Bennett left Nauvoo, and he started publishing in the Sangamo Journal. And in there he said Joseph Smith ordered the assassination of Governor Boggs. And so at that point you really start seeing even stronger habeas corpus acts get passed. Quite honestly, in my opinion, the most expansive habeas corpus acts ever passed in the United States. And they got such that it got to the point where they would actually kind of try the case, look at the merits of the case, and if they determined the merits weren't good enough, they'd toss it on that, not on a legal technicality. And at one point, it even came to a head where they just simply passed, anybody who tries to arrest Joseph Smith on anything that happened in Missouri will be guilty of a crime and you're off to jail. And so they passed a law, though. When they were passing these, it actually kind of backfired on them. And this is on December 21st, 1843. And it was called an ordinance to prevent unlawful search or seizure of a person's or property by foreign process in the city of Nauvoo. And so what that really means is no search or seizure or no arresting by foreign process in the city of Nauvoo. So if you weren't coming from Nauvoo, you weren't going to arrest anybody in Nauvoo. And so a few weeks later, on January 10th, 1844, here are what the minutes from the Nauvoo City Council state. 7 o'clock p.m. special session. And anytime as you're reading through this book you see it says special session, that means something interesting is going to happen. So let me read this to you. It says, the names of the members were called. The mayor stated that Lawyer Backman, Officer Hamilton, and Lawyer Sherman had called on him from Carthage, Illinois, and told him that the occasion of the excitement at Carthage and the resistance to the law in the case of the attempted arrest of Milton Cook. So Milton Cook was wanted in Nauvoo for the crime of bastardy, or having a child out of wedlock, and he was down in Carthage. So the arrest of Milton Cook was the late ordinance of this council to prevent unlawful search or seizure of a person or process by foreign process in the city of Nauvoo. It was this that had incited resistance to the arrest in Carthage. They considered said ordinance to be designed to hinder the execution of the county statutes in the city of Nauvoo by county officers. Consequently, they, the old citizens, felt disposed to stop the execution of legal processes issuing from the city in the county, and also they raised objections against the process issued by Justice Robert D. Foster, the Nauvoo judge, because it was made returnable to him alone, when the statute required it to be made returnable before him or some other justice. So Carthage just turned it on their head and said, if we can't arrest your guys in Nauvoo, you can't arrest our guys here. And turned it right back on them, and about a month later, on February 12, 1844, the Nauvoo City Council repealed that ordinance. So one of the major themes of the book in here, and where you see it building up to, is the Nauvoo Expositor. The press that was published in June of 1844 by the Laws and the Higbees and the Fosters. And one of the major themes in the Nauvoo Expositor was the acts of habeas corpus. And in fact, their big push in the Nauvoo Expositor was actually to repeal the charter and take away habeas corpus from Joseph Smith and the Saints. And so that leads to another big part of this book, and that is the Nauvoo Expositor. And this book really is a game changer as far as that goes. To have these minutes now, to see the discussion going on as they decide whether to destroy the press or not, like I said, it is brand new stuff, and will really help out anybody interested in that. And so things start breaking down between Joseph Smith and the Higbees, Laws, and Fosters long before June. In fact, on January 3rd, 1844, in the City Council minutes, is this great discussion where Wilson Law comes before the city council basically saying Joseph Smith is trying to have me killed. And so again, special session, January 3rd, 1844, at 12 o'clock. The names of the members were called. The mayor directed the marshal to bring William Law and John Snyder before the council, and Joseph and Brother Hiram Smith told him last evening that William Law had said that some of the police had told him that they had been sworn by the mayor secretly to put him, Law, out of the way. William Law come in and was sworn to tell the truth, touching the case before the council by William W. Phelps, clerk of the mayor's court. William Law oath before he said he had been informed that some of the policemen that had another oath been administered besides the one administered publicly, and that in this case, one, they were told there was a Judas in the General Smith's cabinet, one who stood next to him, and he must be taken care of, and that he must not be allowed to go into the world. And so the city council starts calling in all these witnesses, saying, basically trying to run down this rumor of where William Law got this idea that Joseph Smith wanted to assassinate him. And it's fascinating to see them call in all these different people. What did you hear? And where these things came from. But the world went on. Nobody tried to kill William. And, that takes us to June 7th. And so on June 7th, the Nauvoo Expositor was published. And so on June 8th, the city council meets. And one of the individuals who was involved with the Nauvoo Expositor was actually on the city council. And so they first discussed that. The mayor referred to Councilor Sylvester Emmons and suggested the propriety of purging the city council first of nuisances. The man who steps forward to put down iniquity is the first to be put down by the people of this city. And then he goes on to say that he's as good a man as William and Wilson Law. And then Hiram Smith jumps in, and he refers to Dr. Robert D. Foster and his brother Charles A. Foster, and Chauncey and Francis M. Higby, and asked, what good have they ever done? And so they kind of start discussing these individuals who published the Expositor, and they start bringing up anything and everything that they'd ever done. Joseph Smith, the mayor said that at the time he was under arrest, William Law pursued him for $40 he was owing Law, and it took the last expense money he had to pay it. And then they bring up a really interesting character in Nauvoo, a man by the name of Joseph H. Jackson, who at this time, who originally was a friend to Joseph Smith. In fact, Joseph Smith helped him, some authorities were chasing him, and actually helped him use the writ of habeas corpus while in Nauvoo. But they started talking about Joseph H. Jackson, who is now siding with those that are doing the Nauvoo Expositor. Councilor Hiram Smith continued and referred to Joseph H. Jackson coming to this place, and the mayor said William Law had offered Jackson $5 to kill him. Councilor Hiram Smith continued that Jackson told him he meant to have Hiram's daughter. Jackson laid a plan with 4 or 5 persons to kidnap his daughter, and threatened to shoot any man that should come near after he got her in the skiff. He was engaged in trying to make bonus or counterfeit money, which was his principal business. And so this goes on for a long time, this long discussion about the character of these individuals. And then Joseph Smith, in this June 8th meeting, calls for the destruction of the press. And so I'm sure everybody, Joseph Smith asked for the destruction of the press, so obviously everybody went out and destroyed it, right? Actually not. They actually stopped the meeting, set it over, and had a meeting on the 10th. And the meeting on the 10th is very interesting to me as an attorney, but it'll be very interesting to anybody. Let me read from some of that. The mayor declared the paper a nuisance, a greater nuisance, greater than a dead carcass. And so they're legally talking and declaring this a nuisance. The problem is, in Nauvoo up to that point, the only nuisances they've really dealt with are dead animals and a grog shop here and there, a shop that sells alcohol illegally. And so they're having a legal discussion here. And so Councilor Hiram Smith spoke in favor of declaring the Expositor a nuisance. Councilor John Taylor said no city on earth would bear such slander, and he would not bear it. He spoke decidedly in favor of active measures. And here's where I think this is really interesting, that these men on the frontier, here's what they do. Taylor read from the Constitution of the U.S. on freedom of the press. We are willing they should publish the truth, but the paper is a nuisance and stinks in the nose of every honest man. The mayor read Article 8, Section 22 of the Constitution of Illinois. Councilor George P. Stiles spoke, saying the nuisance is anything that disturbs the peace of the community, and read James Chitty's Blackstone's Commentaries on the Law of England. He said the whole community would have to rest under the stigma of these falsehoods. If we can prevent the expositor from the issuing of any more slanderous communications, he would go for it. It is right for this community to show the proper resentment. I would go in for suppressing all further publications of the kind. So these men are actually referring to, you heard me refer to Chitty's Blackstones. They're looking at the legal treatises of the day. They're looking at constitutions. I mean, they're covering their bases. I don't think anybody's going to argue that they already had their mind made up before they had this meeting. I mean, they were going to destroy the expositor. But they went through and they dotted their I's and crossed their T's, or at least so they thought. So Councilor Hiram Smith believed the best way would be to smash the press to all pieces and pie the type. Councilor Aaron Johnson concurred. But the decision to do this wasn't unanimous. Benjamin Warrington, who was a non-Mormon but on the city council, he spoke up against this. Benjamin Warrington said he was convinced this was a peculiar situation for the city council to pass this action, to declare a newspaper a nuisance, and would not be hasty, and he proposed giving a few days limitations and assess a fine of $3,000 for any libel. So this discussion is just amazing. I mean, this is just a small part of it. You also have W.W. Phelps really getting the city council engaged. You know, are we going to let them do this? No. The yells from the crowd, and it's just a fascinating part of this document. And then also the aftermath. You go from these very excited people before to after his death, just people in just absolutely humble, talking about how much do we give the laws for the damage we did. I hope they'll take our settlement offer, those kind of things. Seeing the aftermath is also very fascinating. So the city council, well, it's great. The high council is also very good. I've been trying to ask people who have had a chance to go through the book, which do they like better, and I'm not getting a consensus. There's just so much great from both. But the high council, we see the development of this body kind of grow and figure out where its position is. It's very it's very interesting to see, because there's a lot of confusion back then. Who has jurisdiction over whom? If the 70 excommunicate one of their members, can he then appeal to the high council? What happens if the first presidency does something? What happens if somebody in the 12 apostles does something? Where does it fit? And so in here, this document, we really see this growth, and we see kind of fitting in where they go. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. But on February 2nd, 1840, we see the first non-high council to high council appeal. And that's the case of Brother Francis G. Bishop was taken up and reconsidered, which case had been appealed from the 70s, who hitherto had been suspended by a decision of the quorum of the 70s, voted that the former suspension be null and void and considered illegal with regard to Francis G. Bishop, because he was a high priest, that he should be restored and placed immediately under the care of the high priesthood. So the 70 kind of were out of their jurisdiction, and the high council there established theirs. We have jurisdiction over the 70. A few months later, June 40th, one that a little bit backfired, but on June 40th, they wanted Joseph Smith to focus on the Egyptian documents and the Bible. And so they basically relieve him of his temporal responsibilities. They don't ask him about it. They just decide as the high council, we're going to relieve you of that. What it says, the council relieved President Joseph Smith Jr. according to the request of the memorial, and appointed Henry G. Sherwood to take charge of the city plot and act as clerk in that business, and also to attend to the disposing of the remaining lots in business. So they take these jobs away from Joseph Smith, and quite honestly, jobs that were making him money. And so at the next meeting, June 27th, 1840, Joseph Smith fires back. The notes say, President Joseph Smith Jr. sent in his veto. And, but also, they don't automatically follow that. What they actually do is they set it for a rehearing the following Friday. And so that following Friday, they have a rehearing. Basically, they get what they want. Joseph is going to step down. However, they are going to help him financially, but it's with his blessing. So we have this, again, trying to figure it out. Ultimately, Joseph Smith won, but there's that figuring out. In 1840, though, September 5th, 1840, there's a case against Alman Babbitt. And what's important here is it was Joseph Smith that brought the charge. So again, you would think, okay, Joseph Smith brought the charge, we're going to rubber stamp it, but they don't. They actually go against it, and Mr. Babbitt is not found guilty. Probably the most important one to me, most interesting, is the April 6th, 1841. And that is the General Conference. And so back then at General Conference, like today, they sustain the leaders of the church. And so in the General Conference, they read all the positions in the church, and multiple people were objected to. And so when they were objected to, these people were actually sent to the High Council. And it was the High Council that was going to decide. And so, let me read this here. The council next proceeded to approve or disapprove of certain men for offices who had been objected to as unfit for the offices hereafter named by the quorum of the General Conference. Elder John A. Hicks, president of the Elders' Quorum of Nauvoo, was first taken up for consideration. Objections were made to him relative to a trial which had been between him and Elder John P. Green, which trial was had before the High Council of Nauvoo. Some were dissatisfied with him, thinking that he had not abided by the decision of the council. They discuss it a little bit more, and they say, well, he's okay. We're going to let him keep his position. Bishop Alanson Ripley was next taken into consideration. Objections were made to him for his drinking and immoral habits, which necessarily follows, and his abusing his brethren while under the influence of liquor. And he was okay. They said, all right, you can keep yours. John E. Page of the 12 was next taken into consideration. Objections were made to him for having written certain abusive letters incriminating certain individuals wrongfully. He was spoken of, and ultimately they said, nope, you're okay as well. It went on to James Foster, one of the presidents of the Quorum of the 70, was next taken into consideration. Objections were made to him for his lack of faith and stability in the gospel, his dishonesty, and his temporal dealings with his brethren. He was unanimously disapproved. Now, why this is so important is we see that the High Council, at least in 1841, had jurisdiction over the 70, over bishops, elders, high priests, and the 12 apostles. The High Council of Nauvoo could have removed one of the 12 apostles in 1841. And so their power was extremely great. It goes on. January 18th, they're getting trouble from the bishops. So, I don't have this in my notes. When they get Hiram Smith there at one of their meetings, Elder George W. Harris said he wished to have Brother Hiram Smith inform the council whether, if the bishops should refuse to appear before the council at their request, they had authority to deal with them for such refusal or not. Hiram Smith said they had the power to do so, that they were subject to the High Council. And so, you really see the development of the power in Nauvoo, and it's very, very interesting. Another one that I like is in 1842. There's some trouble between members in the Pleasant Vale branch. They come before the council. Hiram Smith is there at it. He basically tells them both to knock it off, and then William Law says, and you know what? Your branch is dissolved. You're now part of Nauvoo. And he had the power to do that. So very, very interesting. One of the true things with both of these documents coming out is reading them together. Whenever there's a crisis, you get it from the religious and the secular, the civil perspective. And this is no more seen than in 1842, when there was this rash of what I will term spiritual wifery, or this unauthorized polygamy going on. And so, kind of, let me walk you through that, sort of looking at the biblical councils. But in February of 1842, the city council passes an ordinance on marriage, and it's your straightforward ordinance. Man and woman, man has to be 17, woman has to be 14. In April, a few months later, we get the first case in front of the High Council of this sort of pseudo-polygamy. This one not quite as bad, but it was the case of Jesse Turpin, and here is what it was. I prefer a charge against Elder Jesse Turpin for the crime of adultery, having married another man's wife, that of Benjamin L. Clapp. Now, ultimately, he was acquitted of that, but this was the start of that this year. The following month, on May 14th, in the city council, sort of out of nowhere, they passed this law against brothels and other disorderly characters. And in reference to the other disorderly characters, it says, and further, that for every act of adultery or fornication which can be proved, the party shall be imprisoned 6 months and fined each in the sum from $500 to $50,000. And that is the highest penalty that I saw while doing the Nauvoo minutes, was this $50,000. Now that was May 14th. May 17th, John C. Bennett resigns as mayor. 2 days later, on May 19th, there's this sort of odd meeting where no fault is placed. Nobody really says anything. They thank John C. Bennett, and just kind of on your way. Now 2 days after that, we see why. We see why these things are being passed. And that's in the High Council minutes, the case of Chauncey Higby, who you'll recognize the Higby name. He later, 2 years later, got involved with the Nauvoo Expositor. And here's what it is. A charge was preferred against Chauncey L. Higby by George Miller for unchaste and unvirtuous conduct with the widow Sarah Miller. 3 witnesses testified that he had seduced several women and at different times had been guilty of unchaste and unvirtuous conduct with them, and taught the doctrine that it was right to have free intercourse with women if it was kept secret, and also taught that Joseph Smith authorized him to practice these things. So this was very scandalous at the time. Chauncey Higby was cut off, but that wasn't the end of it. 2 days later, the High Council brings in Sarah Miller, and there is sort of a deposition or a questioning, and what she gives them is that I began to be alarmed concerning myself and certain things which I had received from Chauncey L. Higby, and questioned him Higby about his teachings, for I was pretty well persuaded from Joseph's public teachings that Chauncey had been telling falsehoods. But Chauncey said that Joseph now taught as he did through necessity, on account of the prejudices of the people. When he first came to my house, soon after the special conference this spring, Darwin Chase was with him. Chauncey commenced joking with me about my getting married and wanted to know how long it had been since my husband died, and soon removed his seat near me and began his seducing insinuations by saying it was no harm to have sexual intercourse with women if they would keep it to themselves. I told him I did not believe it, and had heard no such teaching from Joseph, neither personally from the stand, but that it was wicked to commit adultery. Chauncey said that it did not mean single women, but married women. When he came again, William Smith come with him, and told me the doctrine which Higby had taught me was true. And so they called in that same day 2 other women, who also started naming names. And throughout the rest of the month, and the months following, they start having these trials on this unauthorized polygamy, this spiritual wife doctrine. And John C. Bennett was also involved in that. John C. Bennett, she goes on talking, saying, what if I get pregnant? Chauncey said there was no danger, that Dr. Bennett understood it and would come and take the child away. So John C. Bennett was also willing to perform abortions, according to these women. And so these things went on. John Cook Bennett leaves town in disgrace, and then he starts publishing these letters in the Sangamo Journal. And so right after that, you have the city council on May 20th testifying that John Cook Bennett was not under duress at the time he testified before the city council concerning Joseph Smith's innocence. And so as you read these 2 documents together, you see the religious aspect, but then you also see how the city has to counteract this as well. And so, while these are documents from, the 1840s, there are some things that we can learn from them today. Good advice still today. The first one, on January 17th, 1843, Henry Cook was brought before the High Council for selling his wife for her weight in catfish. And so, now, according to the document, she was trouble. She really was. But nonetheless, so here's what they say on January 17th. He said that he did not sell her, but something had been said about it which was understood as a joke by himself and the witness. But the party making the offer held it as a bargain, and so did she. So she wasn't too happy with him either. Now later that same meeting, they also try the person that married them, John C. Annis, and here's what this says. It appears that Mary Cook had left her husband, and that her and Wells got married under the plea that he had bought her of Cook for her weight in catfish. And then, so those two are then put on trial a week later, and here's what I just love. Henry Cook's wife, viz., the catfish woman, and John Wells, who said that he had bought her. Their case was brought up and opinions formed on the minutes, taken as evidence, and they were both expelled from the church. She didn't even get her name in the minutes. She is now the catfish woman. And I imagine for the rest of her life, she was the catfish woman. So the first piece of advice, don't try and trade or sell your spouse for catfish. The second one being from September 6th, 1845. The week before, Amassabani was sent a summons saying, you need to show up next week. We're going to have a hearing because we hear you're a drunk. And here's what the minutes from September 6th say. Amassabani, who had been cited before the council on a charge of drunkenness, appeared in a high state of intoxication with a bottle in his pocket and was soon in a state of stupor sleep in the council room, whereupon it was voted unanimously that he be cut off from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and was forthwith conducted from the room by Councilors Wilson and Holman. So my second advice would be, if you're ever called to a high council meeting, best show up sober. Thank you.
Here we do the woman's weight in brine shrimp.
Brine shrimp.
Watch it. That was very good. Questions for John? Wow.
John,
All right.
what to me, in addition to the contents, the minutes themselves and how they're put together, I thought was fascinating. Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and then also, if you could talk a bit about how the High Council minutes in your book are different from Fred Collier's presentation of them.
Okay. Yeah. Currently, well, how do I go? I feel more comfortable with this in my hand. But the High Council minutes come from the Edith Romney transcript, and were supplemented by other sources, such as the Tippett's papers. I'm sorry, I always mix up Avery and Tippett's. The Villeen Tippett's Avery papers at USU, the D. Michael Quinn papers at Yale, the Leonard Arrington collection at Utah State. And that's how they were formed. They come from, they're actually different versions, if you will. When they were doing this, they would take notes on loose scraps of paper and then later copy those into a permanent book for the High Council. The City Council was similar. They actually had 3 steps, though. They had loose ones into a more permanent one, and then more of a finished one, kind of with a table of contents, so when they wanted to look up a certain ordinance, they could very easily. And so what we have are the most complete. Fred Collier did put one out a few years ago of just the High Council. He was missing one of the volumes. The High Council comprises, I believe, 4 volumes. He was missing one of them. And then he misses some of the more exciting things in the High Council as well. The excommunication trial of Sidney Rigdon, the excommunication trial of George J. Adams. And then his isn't annotated or anything like that. Does that answer your question?
Well, and you kind of have to play document detective as you go along, figuring out these, why do we have all these duplicate sets of things? And I just thought it was interesting to see the process of, this set of minutes to the books and finished, and very interesting evolution of the minutes themselves.
There was some detective work that went into it, and luckily I had great people smarter than me helping me along with that.
I actually had nothing to do with it.
But there are portions where you will note that in the text, and it's noted where, for example, we've had to switch from the nice finished copy to the loose minutes because we don't have it for that portion. And you'll see that throughout the book. It will switch to some meetings where all we have recorded are the ordinances and resolutions. We don't have the discussion of that. Sadly, one of those is that May 17th meeting where where John Cook Bennett, where they had the trial on him, I guess. I don't know what happened. We don't have the minutes from that meeting, sadly.
Other questions?
Sir?
Does your book do the minutes cover the time period up to where William Law was excommunicated as a member of the First Presidency?
They don't. My book ends there in the October 1845. And so William Laws, he pops up throughout the book. Like I said, he was dimed out by the women during those trials. He doesn't really come up in a positive way, really. He was never really given any responsibility like Samuel or Hiram. But no, they don't have his trial in there.
How many men were on the High Council? Was there a set number, like 12?
There was a set number, and you're exactly right. It was 12. But then there was also William Marks, the stake president, and his two counselors. And we know that because they actually had numbers assigned, because when they would have these hearings, there were rules put in place where 2 would speak for, 2 would speak against, and it was done by number. So, number 1 and 7 are speaking for, number 2 and 9 are speaking against. So, yes, there were numbers, and they were
So
actually
if somebody
numbered.
died, they would vote in another person?
They would, yes. Someone else was appointed to replace that individual.
Did they have alternates the way they do today?
They do. They would, in both councils. If someone couldn't make it, someone would sit in for them. You see that especially as people started going on missions. They were out campaigning for the president, Joe Smith president, all those kind of things. So they're actually quite a bit. There were alternatives. That's why if you look in the front, there's a list of everybody who served, and it's giant for those 6 years because of all the alternates.
Ron back here has been trying to...
Considering the status of the High Council, do you think William Marks had the better claim to succeed Joseph Smith, or did Sidney Rigdon, do you think, or maybe Brigham Young? Although he seems to have the least credible claim to me.
That's one of my favorite parts of the book is that and the succession. William Marks was incredibly popular and very much loved. And I think if he wanted to, he could have made a much better push than Brigham Young and Sidney Rigdon at the time. Because he was also there. He was in this powerful governing body. But the thing with that is, and where I think it's hard to say, is the all but three members of the High Council went with Brigham Young. So the majority went with Brigham Young. Nobody from the High Council ever made a play for it. Austin Cowles, Leonard Sobey, and William Marks all didn't accept polygamy. Austin Cowles left the High Council and he joined up with the Expositor folks. Leonard Sobey was kind of playing both sides for a while, but he put in for Sidney Rigdon, was ordained into Sidney Rigdon's church before that time, and then William Marks was always very upfront about it, but he also supported Sidney Rigdon, but everybody else went with Brigham Young. So did they know something? I would assume they did if the majority went with him. So while I think Marks could have made a play, obviously he didn't. He didn't think he, had a dog in the fight. And,
That's interesting.
sir.
it seems to me marriage and dissolution of marriage was rather loose at that time. Under civil law, not just in Nauvoo, but civil law in general at that time in our country's history, was there very much formality or legal action that had to take place for a divorce?
I don't know how easy it was, but it was oftentimes discussed. After kind of this first wave of this sexual impropriety in front of the High Council, we kind of get this second wave of, can I marry somebody if I have a living husband or a living wife? So sort of, can I get married in the church without getting a divorce? And you see them say different things. The High Council basically tells one couple, you know, just get a divorce first, and then cuts them off, kind of thing. It really was kind of loosey-goosey. It seemed that if you could prove that your living spouse was adulterous, then you were okay to get married in the church without first getting a divorce. But it was fluid.
But what constituted a civil divorce?
You know, and I can't answer you that right now, but I know there was the fear of civil or criminal punishment due to divorce, because in one of these trials the female showed up but the male didn't, specifically because he was afraid he would be arrested and criminally charged with bigamy. So I can't answer your question.
Any more?
Were African Americans dealt with?
Here and there, they pop up in a few spots. One, Elijah Abel pops up, where they name him. He's named as Elder Abel, so they recognize his priesthood at that point. There's one where, well, Joseph Smith shares some abolitionist views at one point. And then there seems to be sort of a sad one. It looks like some African Americans were actually lynched in Nauvoo. It comes up in the context of these arguments on should we grant more liquor licenses.
Is that Chisholm? Is that the Chisholm case?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I know it's not named in the minutes. Okay. It's just kind of referred to as this lynching. And they use that as that alcohol caused that. Let's not grant other licenses. That was one of the arguments that was brought forth.
What did Smith say about abolition? What were his sentiments?
You know, they don't go into it too well.
Was it a critique of slavery, or?
Yeah, and certainly it wasn't just set them all free. It was you know, pay the owners and then let them free. But he certainly was an abolitionist or emancipationist.
But he did talk about his later plan to ship them to Africa.
Not here, not in these minutes. I believe that was in his platform. But in the minutes, no, just kind of mentioning in passing.
Sir? Be outside the scope of the book. Can you talk about the charge of treason?
With the Nauvoo Expositor?
Yeah, well, explain. I've been a little hazy on that. I've read different views of it and so forth. I was wondering if you have any information on it.
Well, you know, I don't think shooting from the cuff wouldn't do you any good with me. I know that what I've read is his charge of treason. That's what kept him in jail, because you can't bond on treason.
Was he charged with treason for destroying the expositor? Is that correct?
He was charged for treason in relation to all that. I mean, I'd have to look at the statute from the 1840s to give you a good answer. Sorry. Chris?
Of course, Brady, maybe this is outside the scope of your book, but as far as the city council goes and their assessment of fines, were they successful in collecting fines for,
you know, that's also something I can't really answer. One of the things is, even though all the members of the city council basically made up the municipal court, there are the municipal court documents as well. And for the purpose of this project, that was treated not as part of the city council. And so I have looked at those, but I haven't really done an in-depth review of them or know whether they collected
Was the city council in existence as they were crossing the plains in any executive capacity? Because I understand it was the kingdom of God, the political kingdom of God, that was really the governing body as they crossed the plains. Do you know if the city council had anything to do with that?
As far as I know, no. The city council pretty much dissolved in the Quorum of the 12 were running things at that point.
There aren't many members of the council on the 50 on the city council.
There's some overlap. William Marks, for example, he was the stake president, member of the city council in the council of the Quorum of the Anointed Council of 50, and was one of the original 9 who were endowed by Joseph Smith on that first day. So there is some overlap, yes, but
not much.
But not, yeah.
When the minutes were transferred from a temporary papers to the more official or permanent form, was there an editing process going on? Was information redacted, and who did it?
There were some changes. I'd call it more cleaning up rather than redacting, and it was generally done by the clerk. As you look in the book, after every entry, the clerk signs it, whether it's James Sloan, Hosea Stout, etc.
All right.
One more.
One more.
Well, was there anything that you thought you might find that wasn't there, and then you're kind of surprised that?
The biggest surprise that I had, actually, I hope I'm answering your question. The biggest surprise that I had was in reading church history, you kind of always have these 3 Williams lumped together, these 3 apostate Williams, William Law, William Marks, and William Smith. And going back and reading this and seeing William Marks, I think that's just absolutely unfair to characterize him of that. I went through reading this and really liking William Marks as a person. He was very fair. He set up rules to make sure that people got fair trials. At the trial of Sidney Rigdon, they kind of threw the rules out the window, and he tried to, knowing the outcome and knowing that he was hanging himself, he tried to follow the rules. He said, I'll be the one to speak for him, trying to follow those rules of someone speaks for, someone speaks against. And so like I said, he cast his die in with Sidney Rigdon, and the writing was on the wall, but he was a very upfront and honest person, and I ended up really, really admiring William Marks to a point.
Wasn't Marks involved in the Expositor?
He wasn't.
It's Law.
It's William Law. William Marks wasn't.
I thought Marks was too.
John, can we set a date for the signing on the William Marks biography before you leave?
Did you finish?
I did.
One last question. Are you going to keep doing this stuff?
I love it. As long as I can, yes.
Well, speaking of what you're working on, I don't think we finished telling what your next project is.
Okay, I'm kind of working on a companion to your volumes. You did the parallel Book of Mormons. I am taking the Book of Mormon, the 1830 text, and then notating every time it was changed through all the multiple printings. So, for example, if the word was changed, that's highlighted, footnotes dropped, saying what it was changed in the 1837 edition, if it was changed back in the 1844, and what it is today, just to kind of give a look of sort of that publishing history of the Book of Mormon.
What everybody ragged on me about for not doing it. Okay, I think we'll end there. Thank you so much, John. That was excellent.